Hello, strangers. Today we have an extra special surprise. For a new stranger, perhaps a new friend, has done us the pleasure of reading one of the stories. So settle back and enjoy the Darkness Diaries, who will be linked in the description, of course, as she tells story 136.
Every summer you can count on 3 things. 1, the flood of tourists flocking to our lakes. 2, an uptick in newspaper articles about drunk and disorderly behavior at said lakes. And 3, one of those no-name carnivals rolls into town for a couple of weeks, setting up in a disused parking lot. It's the spirit Halloween of July, erecting rides that whip, whirl, spin, and twirl in a matter of what seems like not quite enough time for it to be OSHA-friendly. But while the out-of-towners are getting their lake legs under them, it's a welcome distraction for us locals to flock to. Plus, they bring funnel cake. Everything's better with fried dough. I had just passed my senior year of high school when I and a couple of girlfriends, Wendy and Anna, went to the carnival. It was muggy, and the mosquitoes swarmed under the lights of the midway, blurring the light like halos that rose and ebbed over the attractions. We went on all the rides we, and our stomachs, could handle before taking our chances with the rigged attractions. While I was deciding between knock over the glued-together milk bottles and toss a ring over an oval peg that the ring would barely fit over, Anna squealed and grabbed my arm. When I followed her pointing ring finger to see what she was so excited about, I saw one of the booths had been covered with purple and blue fabric, shot through with silver. Moons and stars. It was a fortune-teller booth. I don't really go in for all that astrology stuff personally, but both Wendy and Anna had diagnosed that as such a Capricorn thing to say, and I didn't care enough to attempt a rejoinder. Besides, I figured, what's the harm? It's just like all these other games. You know you're getting taken for a ride. So I followed as they raced over to the booth to the enchanting Esmeralda to trade 5 tickets for a peek into the past or future. Player's choice. Wendy went first. Esmeralda, a woman who looked to be in her 40s, hair tucked back in a burgundy scarf with green paisley print, asked a few questions, examining Wendy's extended hand, tracing her long black nails over the lines in her palm. She began speaking as to the signs of a significant relationship coming, honing in closer and closer until it was like she was looking at Wendy's crush in a yearbook as she described the fair-haired man in her immediate future. Anna's was about college applications. I figured there had to be some manner of cold reading going on. We were obviously of that age where boys in college were imminent. I thought maybe the palm reading was a means of feeling for a pulse, and Ezzy was being guided by a quickening of their heartbeats as she got closer and closer to the fortune they clearly wanted. Pretty savvy, actually. But as I had no prospects for boys or college, I was already signed up for a trade school, electrical trade, with an eye towards working for my uncle's contracting company. So I wondered how much she'd be able to get from me. I was still deciding how much I should play along when I took the seat and stretched out my hand. Wendy and Anna were elated with their fortunes. Why should I ruin that for them? But as Esmeralda took my hand, she blurted out something that derailed my train of thought. "Dark water!" I what? I looked into her eyes and found she was staring at me. That sort of soft accent, the patter of how she'd talked to my friends, was gone. Her voice was like ours, flat, accentless, and completely unrehearsed. Seeing her switch off the character, how abruptly she'd said that, "Dark water, what does that mean?" put a chill up my spine. She hadn't even bothered to ask any questions. Her eyes were wide and she repeated, "Dark water. You have to stay away from the lakes." Of course. I calmed that weird crawling sensation. She's just guessing. "Oh yeah, well, we tend to stay away from the lakes while it's full-on tourist season. Lot of accidents out there. People don't know what they're..." She cut me off. "You mustn't go into the water. It will swallow you up." I was stunned. In spite of my rationalizing, outright saying what I thought she was guessing at to get her to move on, she was stuck on that, like she really was seeing something. No. This is all just hokum, just a con to get the townies to cough up more money. But she didn't ask for more money to go on. She just did. And with each word, my stomach dropped lower and lower. You must stay clear of the dark water. And him. Especially him. If you don't... I heard Wendy and Anna behind me suddenly, and realized that from the moment I'd sat down, given this woman my hand, it was like my hearing had tunneled, attenuated only to her voice. Even the screams of kids riding the roller coasters and tilt-a-whirls nearby had faded into the background, a low din, but my friend's closeness to me snapped me out of my weird brain fog. Him? Ma'am, I don't think... If you don't, he will kill you, and he'll laugh the whole time. Belief or not, you hear someone warn you like that? Your blood will run just as cold as mine did. I heard Wendy gasp behind me. That sound snapped me out of it. I was suddenly angry. Here I was, being a good sport and playing along with emollient emeraude or whatever, because it was what my friends wanted. They got nice fortunes, and I got... What was this? A death threat? I pulled my hand free of the woman and stood up so suddenly I knocked into her little table, making the trinkets on top of it rattle. Thanks. That's, well, no lakes for me. And I turned on my heel before I could really freak out on her and walked back out of that gloomy tent, needing the clear air of the open sky to shoo the claustrophobic hug of that doomed message. Wendy and Anna were rushing right behind me, asking if I was okay. And once I was out under the night sky, the Ferris wheel's neon looking bright, cheerful, and the opposite of the watery demise that crazy lady had just promised me, I was. Or at least, I felt like I could fake it until the weird feeling passed. Because for the minute I was in that tent, I told them I was fine, pointed out that we weren't going to the lakes, and double pointed out that the him she spoke of didn't even exist. They still seemed a bit rattled, and for my nerves' sake, I needed to convince them it was fine. I added that it was probably a crossed wire, or a bad guess when she couldn't read me clearly due to my lack of belief. Well, Anna replied, that would be your Taurus ascending. Yeah, I said. My Ford Taurus is bad on inclines. It was a bad joke, but it was corny enough to lighten the mood. We went on with the night, ate too many soft pretzels and candy apples, and when I went to bed that night, her doomed prophecy was the furthest thing from my mind. Stayed that way for about a week. The following Friday morning, I grabbed my overflowing laundry basket and headed down to the basement to get my clothes washed. The stairs were old and creaky in a way that was comforting. I had every sound memorized like a jingle I could hum to. I'd been down those stairs so many times. But when I stepped off the stairs and put my slipper-covered foot on the concrete floor, I was suddenly flying backwards, my basket thrown into the air. Then, a thud that whooshed the air out of me as I landed on my back, just barely saving my head from cracking back onto the stairs by tucking myself up like a turtle. It knocked the wind from me, and I lay there, gasping, panicked, looking about like I'd see what happened to me. My parents must have heard me fall, because the basement door above me flew open. My mom's voice rang out even as she pounded down the stairs, coming to a stop on the stair above my head and reached for me. I was still sucking wind, but she was able to put together that I'd slipped. And why had I slipped? Because at some time in the week prior, the washing machine had sprung a leak. The basement floor was covered in a half-inch of water. Watching the gray, brackish, yes, dark, water flow from the other end of the tube into my yard, as the emergency plumber did his best to evacuate it from the house, did indeed have me remembering the Enchantress Esmeralda in vivid detail. I mean, of course I would think about it. Did it completely fit, though? Well, no. While I could have gotten a nasty concussion, maybe fractured something, there was no way I could be said to have been swallowed up by less than an inch of water. And there was no him. I mean, unless you counted the plumber. But he wasn't laughing. He seemed pretty annoyed to be out there, dealing with dirty water while my dad hovered, offering suggestions. And what was I doing anyway? Trying to prove the fortune teller right? It was baloney, a trick the carnies played on dumb townies. I put it from my head. That night, it began to rain. was still raining when I got the call the next morning from Wendy, inviting me to a house party being held by one of our classmates. I had no other plans, and a party sounded like a good way to clear my head, so I said sure. She texted the address, and I dutifully told Siri to navigate me there as I began to drive. But as I did, the rain began to pour. It had been drizzling on and off, leaving the sky looking swollen, gray, like bad fruit swelling from rot. But now it was churning, black, and the winds were whipping the treetops around me, even pushing at my car. I had the wipers on full blast, but as much as they tried to swipe away the water from my windshield. Dark water, so dark you can't see. They just weren't keeping up. It will swallow you. I suddenly got that weird stomach sink feeling again. The blue-black of the sky had no light, no stars, like fabric, like that tent. I pulled over, sat for a second, and as I did, Siri began to recalculate route. When I looked at the screen, my jaw dropped. The route I had been on had a bridge. Operative word, had. But Siri was now informed, from whatever mysterious cloud of farmed data it accessed, that the bridge wasn't my best option. She gave me the order to take the next right, before the bridge, which was in sight of the bridge. Or would have been, if it was still there. It wasn't. There were sawhorses and lights, work trucks from the city, and police cordoning off the road. And behind them, the usually placid river was gushing like blood from an open wound. Any sign of the bridge that would have straddled its shores, that my car was meant to be on, was lost in the swirling don't say it, churning. You'll jinx it, you don't believe in this stuff, dark water. But there it was. I mean, skeptic or not, this was clearly the sign. The bridge had been swallowed, and if I hadn't freaked out, listened to your gut, then I would have been as well. I drove on, a good 10 under the speed limit, feeling almost giddy. Like the rain was validating me, it stopped, almost like a spigot had been turned off in the heavens, and that made me crank the radio and sing along, feeling almost manically excited. Because her words had been like a curse, right? And that was clearly over. I had avoided the dark water. Curse broken. I made it to the house party. The kids' parents whose house it was came from good money, and the house had every amenity. There were a ton of kids there. Some I knew, some I didn't. And my mood was so light, so breezy. I had just escaped a curse, or something close to it. I was ecstatic to be there. Wendy and I danced, wandered around, and had shouted conversations over the din of the crowd. The noise got to our ears after a bit, so Wendy and I moved it along outside to the backyard. The kids' house had not only a pool, a luxury given that we had lakes and freezing winters, most people didn't bother, but a gazebo, a jacuzzi, and what looked like a trampoline. I was eyeing it when Wendy's elbow sailed into my side. "It's him!" I looked, and sure enough, up was sauntering her crush, tailed by some other guy we didn't know. As they approached, though, I saw Wendy's nose wrinkle with my own. They reeked of alcohol and smoke. I began to turn, to say something about them standing downwind, but Wendy locked eyes with me, pleading silently for me not to say anything, potentially screw this moment up for her. So I smiled, and took to breathing through my mouth as they finally approached and began talking. Wendy's crush was all smiles, but the guy she was with was eyeing me up and down in a way I didn't like. Almost immediately, he was smirking, doing that thing where he was saying compliments that ended in insults, about how we weren't dressed right to be poolside. Who would let us in? And why would we wear so much makeup to a party? Why? That's why you gotta take them swimming on the first date, just to see if they're catfishing ya. I just smiled, sipping my non-alcohol enhanced drink. I could hold my temper long enough for Wendy to get her starry-eyed romantic moment in. I just had to. And that's when I felt his arms lock around my waist. Before I could react, before I could do more than fling my arms out, dropping my cup of soda the guy was half carrying, half lugging me to the pool. I struggled, more out of shock than anything, not yet comprehending what was happening. I saw Wendy's face. Her mouth was opening, her eyes widening. She was taking a step forward, but the bar of her crush's arm was coming down, barring her from coming closer, chasing after this guy tug-of-war, pulling her friend away towards the pool. Steam rose from its mirror surface into the sky. I dug my heels in, then gave up. It was slippery, and the shoes I wore gave no traction. I began kicking backwards, trying to get the guy in the shins, but he wasn't bothered. The more I struggled, the more I began to thrash. The louder his laugh rang out. The washing machine hadn't been the curse. That water was too shallow to swallow me. The bridge also hadn't been the curse, because what was the last thing the enchantress Esmeralda had said? He'll laugh the whole time. And then, I was under. It was dark and cold. I immediately began to scissor kick to the surface, but I couldn't. He'd not just tossed me in. He'd jumped in with me and he was holding me under. The sound below the water was muffled, drifting. I kicked out in earnest, swung my arms to hit, to slap. Like in a dream, my limbs were leaden, the water wouldn't let me get momentum, and dampened my punches like the sound around me. And as he held me against his chest, I could both feel and hear his laughter. As before, the more I struggled, the more fun he seemed to get out of it. My heart was pounding back, like it was pushing back against the reverb of his laughter, and my lungs were beginning to hurt, legitimately hurt. My fingers were still digging to get under his arm and unlock his grip, but he was holding firm. Even for a joke, surely he had to realize he'd been holding me under for too long, right? But even as I thought that, I somehow doubted he was all that aware, that he had some internal stopwatch to time how much was a reasonable limit to hold a girl underwater for a dumb joke, a prank. I'm going to die because of a prank. And at that thought, the same anger, the fury I'd felt at Esmeralda just dumping that crap pile of a fortune, a full-on curse on me, came bubbling up. My fingers still clawed, instead raked against his arms, and in my mind I thought tear into them, rip him open. And as suddenly as he'd grabbed me, suddenly that pressure, that terrible iron band of pressure across my chest, was gone. I sensed him kick away from me, and as dark as that water was, I swear I saw a hint of red ribboning from behind me as he pulled his arms from me, his body from mine. But I was already feet on the floor of the pool and pushing myself up, rocketing towards that light that had been dimming but was now closer, and with a splash, light and sound returned as I broke the surface. Summers are still predictable in my hometown. The warmer months bring the tourists and the mosquitoes, and the newspaper is full of the half-page of boating accidents and drunk tank arrests, and in whatever unused parking lot is available. Now, the parking lot of what used to be a Mervin's, some no-name carnival sets up, sending fryer oil and delighted screams through the air. Sometimes my friends, no longer Wendy and Anna, both of whom moved on to college, bigger towns and different men, thank God, convince me to go. And I do. But not to the Midway. For I tested my luck on a game of chance once, and the prize, my life, isn't one I'm willing to let ride.
Again, a big thank you to the Darkness Diaries for lending her wonderful voice. Can't tell you what a delight it was to hear her tell that story. And if you, like I, are left wanting more, boy are you in luck, because she has a whole channel of wonderfully spooky stories. And all can be yours for the low, low cost of a click on subscribe. Who knows? You may find yourself hearing a familiar stranger over on her channel sometime soon. Until next time, stay strange, stay safe, and take care, strangers.